What's up, guys? I'm LQ. This is the LQ review, and got a movie review for you today. Actually, I got a couple of them, but the first one I'm going to do is something that I was kind of late to the game to, and that is The Long Shot. So that's the movie that came out over the summer with Seth Rogen and Charlize Theron, and it's about basically he's kind of a sloppy journalist and somebody who's broken some big stories, but his life isn't really all together. She is the Secretary of State, and she is somebody who has a presidential run in mind. And she wants to become the first woman president. Well, he actually attends a benefit that she is a part of, and they recognize each other instantly. Turns out that she was his babysitter back when they were kids. She was 16 and he was like 12, 13, somewhere in that area. And he had a major crush on her. And now that they're, both adults, that there's chemistry there. Well, she ends up hiring him to be her speechwriter. And he has this idea on what he wants politics to be and how he wants politicians to behave. Being a writer, especially a journalist, have very idealized thoughts in their minds on what politicians are, anyways. So he does not like the dark side of politicians, and that's backroom deals or give and take. Sometimes you have to give up something that you want to get something else that you want. So he doesn't like that side of it. So he's trying to get her to fight for the things that she actually believes in, the things that she's passionate about. So over the course of the movie, they develop a romantic interest in each other, and I don't think it's really spoiling anything to say that they end up together, right? I mean, that's kind of what we know is going to happen. So first of all, the funny parts of the movie. There's a lot of really great comedy in this, and that's not to be surprising. That this is Seth Rogen. Seth Rogen is great at comedy. He's great at the physical comedy, and what I love about him is his sarcasm. Right, Seth Rogen has a great sense of sarcasm, and that comes out in this movie especially, because this movie is very critical of a lot of what's going on in politics today. And I always say that I don't care if a movie has something to say. I don't care if its message is liberal leaning. I don't care if its message is conservative leaning. I don't care either way. If a movie has something to say, that is not a negative toward the movie. It is a negative if message gets in front of stories. Stories should always come first. Message should serve the story, just like characters should serve the story. The story shouldn't serve characters, just like the story shouldn't serve message. So I have no problem with a message in a movie, and I don't care what the message is. Conservative, liberal, somewhere in the middle, doesn't bother me at all. Messages in our stories get conversation started. Whether you agree with the message or disagree with the message, it can get conversation started, and conversation is very healthy for society. Not yelling at each other and calling people names and all that stuff. That's not healthy for society. As a society, we've forgotten how to have conversations about difficult topics. And that's one of the things I love about movies. Movies is a way that we can have conversations about difficult topics, and it's kind of removed from reality a little bit, right? We can have those conversations about those difficult topics, but we're actually just talking about the movie, right? Even though we're not. So this movie does have a heavy-handed dose of criticism for what's happening in politics today, but that is not a detriment to the story. And every time they bring it up, it's usually in service of a joke, and it's usually really funny. Seth Rogen, like I said, his comedic timing is always on point, and this was no different. He was very good in this. Charlize Theron was also very good in this, given the material she had to work with. She didn't have a lot of material to work with. She was mostly the straight arrow in this movie, and he was mostly the kind of the chaos that gets entered into her life. So through the course of the movie, they fall in love, and this is where we get to some of the negatives in The Long Shot. The love story felt very Hallmark to me. It felt very Hallmark movie of the week. Look at this this slob kind of down on his luck guy. He meets this rich Secretary of State, and they're star-crossed lovers, and they fall in love, and it's all good, and they're all happy. It felt very, very Hallmark movie of the week. In fact, usually in romantic comedies, you get to a point in the movie where they have to split. Be it an old boyfriend comes back, or usually there's a plot point near the end of the second act where they have to split up. They fall in love, they know they're in love, and then they have to split up. And then the third act is them finding their way back together, and that happens at the end of the movie, at the end of the third act. That plot device was in play here. All right, near the end of the second act, something happens, and they decide they can't be together. But the way that they end up getting back together, it felt like the whole third act was wasted space. Because she makes a decision at the end of the third act that she wants to be with him, so she has consequences to that decision. In fact, as a matter of fact, the person who has the most consequences of that decision is Seth Rogen's character. But there was no growth in the third act for her. At least no growth that I really felt was significant enough for her to change her mind from the end of the second act to the end of the third act. There was no reality perceiving changes that happened in her character throughout the course of the third act. So I just felt like the third act was filled with stuff that it was filler. The third act was filler. The movie could have ended at the end of the second act if she had just made the decision then instead of a half hour later. So I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like the plot point that tore them apart, it was a convenience because, hey, this is a romantic comedy. Near the end of the movie, we have to tear them apart so they can get back together and have that romantic moment. And I didn't like it in this movie. It felt very cheap to me. That's not to say that the comedy wasn't great. The comedy was great in this movie, but the romance, while it felt genuine, really it felt genuine in the second act. The third act, it all just felt a little contrived to me, a little bit, I don't know, paint by numbers. So that's kind of the way I felt about the third act. But overall, this movie is probably a B- territory for me. It's good. I laughed. It's a comedy, guys. A comedy, as long as you laugh at a comedy, you can forgive a lot of the other stuff that happens in the movie that just doesn't make sense. And I laughed a lot in this movie. So it being a comedy and I laughed, I can forgive some of that third act nonsense that I felt didn't need to be there. And by the way, the movie was a little long. All right. So this was a comedy that stretched for a little bit over 2 hours. Usually I think that sweet spot for a comedy like this is 90 to 100 minutes. That's a sweet spot. All right. Comedies that run over 2 hours often feel long because the joke is starting to wear out. And I felt that way in this too. This felt a little long. Towards the end of it, I was like, let's get to it. Let's get to it. And that might be why the third act also felt a little off to me. But overall, like I said, this is a B- movie for me. It was solid. It made me laugh, but it wasn't great. It wasn't great. I just felt, like I said, I felt paint by numbers. I felt Hallmark movie of the week. So that's how I feel about it. Have you seen The Long Shot? Let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. And thank you for being here. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, I appreciate you being at the LQ Review, where we talk about all the geeky, nerdy stuff that we love to talk about. And until next time, we'll see you later.